I'm Dr. Karen Knudsen, CEO of the American Cancer Society. As the American Cancer Society 2022 National Research HERS Ambassador, I'd like to thank you for joining me in this important program. As a female in oncology research myself, I have a special passion for research HERS. ACS is proud to be a top supporter of women in cancer research. Of those who disclose gender, about half of ACS grantees are women, most of them early in their careers. 100% of the donations raised through the Research HERS campaign are dedicated to help support and sustain our portfolio of ACS-funded grants led by women. As of January of this year, there are 237 women-led research projects totaling more than $141 million. These projects were eligible to receive funding raised through the Research HERS program last year. All the proceeds, 100%, raised from the campaign support the direct costs of three important ACS initiatives. First, funding women-led cancer research grants. Second, supporting paid parental leave for postdoctoral fellows in cancer research to help alleviate the challenges of remaining in the workforce while expanding their families. Finally, funding of the Summer Health Research Experience, SHE in Oncology, a 2-week virtual program that introduces high school juniors or seniors who identify as female to a wide range of cancer-related career experiences. In May of this year, Research HERS campaigns will kick off in more than 20 communities nationwide with a goal of raising more than $1.6 million. Women make invaluable contributions to cancer research, yet we know are underrepresented in research leadership. As the leading nonprofit funder of cancer research in this country, we can help sustain women-led cancer research, launch new careers, and inspire an entirely new generation of young women in considering careers in science. So thank you for joining me as a Research HERS ambassador.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Megan McNeely, and I'm a Senior Development Manager at the American Cancer Society, leading our Research HERS initiative in the greater Philadelphia area. I want to thank you for being with us this evening for our special edition of Women in Leadership, a conversation in and out of the lab. I'm your moderator for our panel discussion this evening. As you just heard from our CEO and 2022 National Researcher Ambassador, Dr. Karen Knudsen, Research HERS Women Fighting Cancer is a movement for our community's most influential leaders who want to drive progress in cancer research and are passionate about gender equality. Its goal is to support the growth and development of female researchers and provide a platform to raise money and awareness for women in science. We are honored that Dr. Karen Knudsen will be our Research HERS first national ambassador and thank her for leading the charge. Let's turn our attention tonight why you all joined us, a conversation around male allyship. Women continue to challenge equality and gender diversity while making critical and often life-saving contributions to society. To achieve sustainable change and create a culture in which both women and men can excel, however, men must be a part of that conversation and stand as allies for women. We are honored to have two special guests with us this evening to listen to, learn from, and continue the conversation with. Joining us live are Dr. Ishwaria Subbiah and Dr. Otis Johnson. Thank you both for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
It's a pleasure for me as well. Thanks.
So I want our audience to get to know you a little bit, like I've gotten the chance. So please share a bit about your background, including your company and your role. And I'd love, Ashwarya, if you would start us off.
Sure. My name is Ishwaria Subbiah. I am a medical oncologist and integrative medicine and palliative care physician at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. I am a clinician investigator. The work that I do involves taking care of patients, providing holistic symptom management, optimizing quality of life during cancer treatment. And the research aspect of my work centers on integrating comprehensive symptom management to improve how patients do on cancer clinical trials, especially early phase trials, and integration of remote symptom monitoring into routine oncologic care. And so, that's the work elements of me, which I thoroughly enjoy. And I'm also married to an oncologist, Vivek, my husband of 12 years, and we have 3 little children who are at my parents' house, so we don't have a risk of them barging in today. But this is me and our life.
Welcome again, and thank you for joining us. Otis.
Thank you. So my name is Otis Johnson. I was born and raised in beautiful Jamaica. I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry for 22 years and would not change a thing. My work includes 13 years in scientific and operational roles at Merck, developing drugs in a number of therapeutic areas and indications, including respiratory and women's health. I also spent a total of 7 years at 2 large contract research organizations, ICON and Seniors Health, and 6 months at Pharmaceutical Enhancement Strategies, a clinical trial data startup. Overall, my passion is to transform business units within healthcare through strategic changes and operational improvements. And this includes a focus on our ongoing Clario work of solving the lack of diversity in clinical trials. 2 recent events, one more significant than the other, reinforced my love and admiration for this industry. The world was waiting anxiously for our industry to deliver on a vaccine to stem the pandemic, and we came through. That made me immensely proud to be part of an industry that delivered when it mattered most. The other event was a conversation with a professional contact from another industry. She said to me, Otis, I'm really good at my job. I consistently get the best performance rating. I have a good manager and I am paid well, but I'm not excited about work. It is not fulfilling for me. As I listened to her, I reflected on the work we do at Clario, my current company, and thought to myself, for the most part, we don't have this problem. We are fortunate to work in the healthcare industry. We are fortunate to have the opportunity to empower our customers to transform lives through the work that we do. It is not difficult to find purpose and meaning in our work. So Clario is a technology company that collects data to help regulatory agencies like the FDA determine if a medicine should be approved for use. I am the Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Sustainability Officer. My dual role is to support our economic success and ensure that as we grow our business, we're doing so responsibly and being good corporate citizens. Because doing well and doing good are connected and intertwined. And I design and implement programs to create a diverse and inclusive workforce and to manage our impact on the environment.
Well, first, I'm really happy I had you introduce yourselves because I don't think I could do either of you justice. So thank you both. And I'd love to dive right into tonight's topic. I'm going to start with, what individual experiences have you influenced your thinking around gender and have motivated you to be an ambassador and an advocate for change? Ishwaria, will you start us off?
Absolutely. It starts with what we see ourselves when we grow up, right? When was the first time in life you had to answer that question for yourself or in front of others? And when I reflected ahead of today's event, that's one of the earliest places that I started. And I say that because what you can aspire to and what you hope to do, there are elements that are set, that are shared with us externally so early in life. And as we go through life, as we get increasing exposures to others doing good work, we see those sparks of inspiration from others' work. And that's exactly what happened with me. And so it was the awareness from an early age, and that's from the environment between the school and family, between schools and family, emphasizing that you truly can be whatever you'd like to be. And having models in my life, some within my family, but many outside, who do work that inspires me, that makes me admire them. And finally, it was during the educational periods, the higher education periods, having exposure to different settings, whether it's a laboratory, whether it's a clinical setting, whether it's an industry, whether it's regulatory settings, whether it's legislative settings. this gave me not just a sense of what are the different avenues that someone can make an impact, it also gave me a sense of who are the people who are there. And is it somewhere where I could see myself being? And so having that type of awareness, however subconscious, ultimately factored heavily into where I am today. And so I am incredibly thankful for opportunities that gave me the exposure and opportunities that gave me exposure and to see women leaders, to see women of color in leadership roles, to know that that is something that's okay to aspire towards.
I love that. And I love how you talked about it's not just one location, right? It's not just your education or just your family. It's all your different environments combined that kind of form who you are. Otis, will you share?
Sure. Ishwaria, you said it very well. It is important to have people to emulate. It is important to have role models. For me, I have been around strong women and have seen them excel all the time. Women and men are equal, period. It bothers me that certain practices and actions in the workplace sometimes don't reflect an understanding of this basic fact. In one of the chapters of my change management book, I wrote about a woman who saw leadership potential in me. I met her by accident through a mutual contact who needed someone to join a panel at an industry conference. I was a last-minute substitute for someone who could no longer make it to the conference. She must have been impressed with my contribution on the panel because she reached out to me a year later with a job opportunity. I eventually went to work for her. The first major deliverable I produced was challenged by one of her peers with no sound basis. My manager, Ramita Tandon, stepped in and stood up for me. Her actions gave me instant credibility in this new organization and propelled my career from that point forward. So I have immense respect for women and will continue to fight for gender equality. I carry experiences like these into my role at Clario. It is important for our colleagues, vendors, partners, and customers to enjoy working with us and to feel that we will always treat them fairly and with respect.
Wonderful.
I'm sure our audience already sees why we selected you to talk on tonight's panel for both of you. So my favorite questions always include reflecting on numbers because I feel it adds a layer of that hard truth. So here we go, bear with me. When 10 major US orchestras use blind auditions, the odds of women making it past the first round improved by 50%. Another example, by replacing a woman's name with a man's name on a resume, improves their odds of getting hired by more than 50%. And study after study show the same pattern. So how has this experience shown up in your lives? Otis, I'd love to start with you this time.
Sure, my pleasure. Clearly, this is a real issue. And even though I'm not a woman, I have experienced something similar and found a way to create my version of a blind audition. For a long time, I resisted putting my image on LinkedIn profile for fear of being discriminated against. I didn't want to lose out on job opportunities. I wanted to be evaluated based on my skills, my experience, and my competences. I was confident I could succeed on the merits of those. A woman on our team mentioned that she uses the shortened version of her name because the shortened version could be perceived as either male or female. Her name is Teresa, but she uses Terry. That's how she guards against potential unconscious bias. That is her blind audition. Now, speaking specifically about Clario, we are preventing this experience by intentionally infusing diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything we do, including our ongoing conversations, training, and even through the technology we use for hiring. We know that diverse groups are more successful. In a 2019 analysis covering 1,000 companies in 15 countries, McKinsey found that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability. than companies in the fourth quartile. This was up from 21% in 2017 and 15% in 2014. They further found that companies with more than 30% women executives were more likely to outperform companies with 30% or less women executives. Now, one feedback I often hear from talent acquisition teams is that there isn't enough women or people of color for the roles that they are recruiting for. My response is usually that it is not true. We are simply not looking in the right places. We keep using the same approaches and sources that have led to the lack of diversity in the workforce. So at our organization, we recently piloted two talent acquisition platforms that optimizes the search for diverse talent. They both have features that simulate a blind audition, as they have the capability to hide a candidate's name and picture and focus on matching the skills to the job requirements. This is an important way to reduce unconscious bias in the hiring process, which will result in more diverse workforce and stronger outcomes.
I love that. Ishwaria, share your experience, please.
Absolutely. Without a doubt, this concept of unconscious bias, when I was first exposed to it as an entity, was during actually my fellowship training through programs done at MD Anderson to raise broad awareness amongst the community on what unconscious bias is. And so as I'm hearing this entity described, suddenly I think back to interactions over time. I think back to situations over time, to committee meetings, to candidate selection meetings, etc. And suddenly I started to recognize retroactively patterns that were consistent with unconscious bias, with gendered language. And so it became clear that the moment we have broader awareness of what it is, that aware person will recognize events in their past, whether it was about them or situations that they were in, that aligns with what unconscious bias is. It's so what do we do about it, right? I learned of it as an entity during my postgraduate training. And so I'm in an organization that conscientiously creates concise and data-driven module of training on what unconscious bias is. Anyone who sits on a search committee, anyone who's involved in a decision-making role is required to take that training. And I emphasize it because even if you may be in a role, in a position for decades, this is not a skill that is generally taught in most environments, in most educational programs. And so you truly have to either seek this out or you have to wait until your area presents this type of training. And so the fact that unconscious bias training is a key part of leadership searches makes a difference, certainly made a difference in our institution. But the fact that it is part of the conversation and that it needs to be part of really every phase of education so that the community at large recognizes that this is the entity that's there. This is what you may have experienced in the past or you may be experiencing actively. So that need to raise awareness cannot be understated.
So because you both shared individual experiences with your companies, I have to share a point of pride with the American Cancer Society before we move on. We utilize a really rigorous peer-to-peer review process with strict criteria during our grant selections. And our reviewers aren't provided with the gender or race of the application. So by focusing on that best of the best science, we get to naturally see that ACS research grantees who do disclose their gender, and about half identify as women. So it's just such a great stat that I love to share when we have an opportunity. But this also brings me to my next question. Many speak to diversity and inclusion, but do nothing beyond saying the words. And all too often, gender parity is excluded from the conversation altogether. So how can we make this more of a central issue, given the assailable evidence that diverse cultures do lead to inclusive workplace performances? Otis.
Megan, I love that we're much more open and accepting of all types of diversity in the workplace. And I agree that conversations simply aren't enough. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, which includes equity for all gender identities, must become established in your company's culture as a norm, as a way of doing business. I will say it again, men and women are equal, period. There's no reason we shouldn't have a balance of gender in leadership, which we defined as director and above. To make gender parity more of a central issue, you must measure it, you must share the metrics openly, you must develop measurable goals with supporting actions to improve them, and you must hold leaders accountable for achieving them. Gender parity is front and center of my company's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. We need to hold ourselves accountable for the actions we're taking and commitments we're making. So to do that, we've established very specific, measurable goals that are endorsed at all levels of our company, meaning we have the full commitment of our board and executives. In our organization, we have set a goal to achieve binary gender balance in leadership over the next 3 years with yearly incremental targets. We're doing the groundwork now to understand the appropriate KPIs to set for other gender identities. Now, our 2021 baseline for females in leadership positions was 36%, and we have a number of programs we're implementing to achieve gender balance by the end of 2024. We have full buy-in and commitment to the agreed actions to achieve this goal, and we're monitoring the metrics and reporting them on a regular basis.
I love the accountability that you're setting for yourselves, because really without the accountability, there is only words. So Ashwarya, what does accountability look like for you in this topic?
Absolutely. You have to measure the impact, right? You have to be methodical, and you have to be intentional, both in principle, but also in how you would operationalize a program towards a goal. And these are standard approaches. And so having a diverse work, attaining gender parity requires of a methodical approach. And so it's looking across your organization and identifying areas where there isn't representation, or areas where the leadership doesn't reflect the broader gender breakdown of that area. Within the academic realms, we recognize that we in our scientific hats, we know the importance of measurement. That's what drives every one of our hypotheses and grant submissions to the ACS, et cetera. And so it's not a concept that's new. And so having that measurement-driven approach to gender parity is the way to go. And making sure that you work across institutions, across practice settings, to exchange best practices. You as an individual organization, you really don't have to start from zero. There are programs across the country that have anywhere from a 5 to 30-year head start on attaining and maintaining gender parity and an inclusive work environment. So any singular place does not have to start from scratch, having to invent the wheel for themselves. This is where having a community, a national and international community with open conversations on and identification and sharing of best practices is key for the benefit of everyone, not just because you get to share and learn what others have done, but really to normalize the conversation. Elements related to DEI in many places may be thought of as a one and done, Okay, we can check that box. We had the DEI lecture for the year. No, this is a day-to-day, hour-to-hour journey that your entire organization goes through. And so having these measures that you collectively develop both within your group, but also in partnership with others across the country, make this no different than any other quality metric that you may have for your organization.
All right, I want to stay on this topic just a minute more and dig into that last question, but a little bit deeper. Many corporate diversity efforts focus on either gender or race, but very few focus on gender and race combined. What are your thoughts on addressing this very unique issue, Ishwaria?
I'm a supportive and palliative care physician, and I practice integrative medicine. So holistic is a word I say probably about 30 times a day. And it's because each person comes as a whole. You don't dissect individual elements of their experience. And so the fact that the candidate in front of you is a man, as well as a minority, as well as they may be the primary caregiver for either a parent or a spouse or a child, and they may have they may have come from a disadvantaged background with limited access to resources. So the person that you see in an interview, the person that you see in your workplace, is an amalgam of their experience. And so when you as an organization are looking to bring people on board, it truly doesn't become about checking boxes. And that's why the previous question about measurement, I emphasize that it has to be thoughtful measures. It has to be measures that you develop that align with the goals of why you're doing this. It's not just about having X number of specific categories. It's about having people on board on your team who meet who meet a need you have and share your vision, but are evaluated holistically. What is their whole experience? As a minority woman, I can't really draw a line between my experience as a woman and my experience as a person of color. It truly is a package. And so I think this is where hiring practices and evaluation practices that have a holistic approach, you really get meaningful information on how that person how they got to this point. And it gives you a very clear idea on how they'll fit into your organization going forward as well.
I love that really just thoughtful reflection. And thank you for sharing. Otis, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well.
Yes, Megan, I'm really glad you brought this topic up. But before I respond, I want to amplify a powerful term that Ishwaria used in her previous response. The term is intentional and is the key to DEI progress. Now, although issues of race and gender are unique, there are some commonalities. And sometimes one initiative can serve both constituents. I'll share an example in a minute. It is hard for a man to accurately express the difficulties a woman faces in the workplace. And it's equally hard for me as a Black man to accurately express the difficulties a woman of color faces regarding her race in the workplace. That said, I have seen gender and racial disparity play out at the same time, and it is something that we fight against in our work. We have contemplated this issue in our High Potential Emerging Leadership Program and have addressed both issues of race and gender in the selection process for that program. Once you're in this Emerging Leadership Program, your career is on a fast track and you are likely to get promoted. So it is a desirable, selective, and prestigious employee development program in our organization. Now, as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, we have set a target for the minimum % of women and people of color to be selected for this program each year. And this year, the initial list of nominees did not meet the race and gender target we set. By adding more women of color, we were able to address both gender and race and meet our established diversity and inclusion goals. I want to ensure that our audience does not miss the key point in all of this. We must set measurable diversity, inclusion, and inclusion goals, and we must be willing to make the changes necessary to achieve them. Diversity, equity, and inclusion will not happen by chance. We must be intentional. So Ishwaria, you have it right.
All right. I won't say shift focus, but we've talked a lot about what the missing things are from companies. So I want to talk a little bit about the positive, right? When a company is focused on gender equality and it makes it a priority, what practices have been successful in reducing barriers faced by employees? Ishwaria?
Normalizing conversation about an inclusive workplace is a key starting point. You have to remove any type of stigma. Stigma may be too harsh of a word for some places, but the reality is if it makes you a little bit uncomfortable when there's a conversation starting about an inclusive workplace, we as a community have to understand and get to the bottom of that. And more importantly, is to find ways to get rid of that. We have to be able to have conversations, and that means having safe spaces to do so. For any person of any background to be able to have that safe space to have those conversations. In terms of how I've seen this play out successfully is not just singular events through the year. This will be our one DEI event of the year. No, this is going to be a continued multidimensional approach. You heard me allude to training a little bit earlier, where you as an institution get together with key members of your employee base and develop very focused, concise, high value, high impact points to convey to your very busy audience of employees. Have those accessible throughout the year and highlight those throughout the year. And for employees who are entering into a role that requires checking an immediate self-awareness a boost, if you will, in their individual biases, is to make those training a required part of that process, such as search committees. In terms of the second is celebrating what unites us and celebrating that we as a community of employees are coming together towards a central mission. Well, we have individual backgrounds, we have individual stories, whether it's culturally or heritage or our genders, et cetera. So, celebrate the various heritage months, celebrate the various festivals and events that are important to a person from their culture and their backgrounds, and make that as a part of the norm versus a side event that's only attended by members of that particular group. We have to all experience this. We all have to experience one another holistically, right? Because that's the lens that we're bringing to a table. And so understanding what is behind that lens really involves embracing aspects of individuals' backgrounds and cultures and their practices.
I hope some of the options you presented are familiar to our audience and that they get to experience them. If not, I hope they're taking notes to bring back to their companies. Otis.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned previously, and I hope the message is clear by now, men and women are equal, period. So we are working with our leadership to achieve gender equality by solving gender pay gap issues, ensuring equal representation of women in leadership, and creating an inclusive environment in which women can do their best work. Beyond solving for these material focus areas, we're encouraging our leadership to serve as sponsors for women in our workplace. Now, there's a difference between being a mentor and being a sponsor. And our Chief People Officer expressed the role of a sponsor quite well. She described a sponsor as someone who is willing to put their brand behind you. Earlier, I spoke about our prestigious Emerging Leadership Development Program. Well, during the selection process for last year's program participants, 2 women were taken off the list. The reason their managers gave was that they were too busy to participate in the program. As a sponsor of those 2 women, I challenged their removal from the list. My main argument was that the reason they were even considered for the leadership development program was exactly because they had a lot going on. They were selected because they are reliable. They were selected because they do excellent work. They were selected because they are the people who will be the next generation of leaders in the organization. So, yes, they are busy, but they are exactly the type of leaders we must develop through this program. Now, I'm happy to report that one of those women got promoted within a week of completing the program. Being a strong ally and advocate, like I was in this situation, is one of the key roles of a sponsor. So you might then ask, how do you find sponsors? We're asking each of our executive leadership team members to find and sponsor two high potential women in the organization. And we're working with our talent development team to formalize and scale our sponsorship program and to make it part of our intentional way of working.
I love all of these examples. And as you can guess by now, I'm a little bit of a data geek. So, having stats and measurements and all of those systems in place makes me really happy. It also means I really like research. And another item of research is that the greater men's awareness of gender bias is, the more likely they are to feel it's important to achieve gender equality. So the real question is, what ignites that attitude of change? And why is it important in creating that culture in which both men and women can excel? Otis, I'm going to tap you as our male ally representation tonight to go first.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Megan. And really, the first step is always talk about it, have an honest discussion. It's okay to be open and honest about gender bias because it exists. And it's the gateway to real change. And if you have data to support the conversation, use it. The results of months and years of bias, whether conscious or unconscious, will show up in the data. So shine a light on it and work together to fix it. So, yes, I agree that the more awareness there is, the more likely you are to take action to achieve equality. As to what ignites that attitude change, I use the word intentional again. I believe it takes intentional planning and effort to ignite and sustain the change needed. Even in seeking to answer this question, mind starts to wonder about the things I do not know. What perspectives are we missing because our team is not diverse? What are we missing because we do not have a woman's perspective? An example I've heard recently is our return from remote work. As we were looking at how a gradual return to work creates chaos for our parents of young children who require childcare, are we giving enough notice for these working parents to set up quality care so they can return to work? And as an example, I didn't even think of this additional burden to some in our workforce. It was a woman on our team that brought it up. So sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And we can solve this quite easily by asking a diverse representative group. This is why it is so important to have diversity in our workforce at every career level and in every team. So at Clario, we have always recognized the importance of diversity and the powerful perspectives that our employee differences in background and worldview bring to solving problems like these.
I'm just going to say, as a working mom, I really appreciate that diverse voice in the room. Ishwaria, will you give us your thoughts?
Absolutely. When we look at the concept of allyship, we are truly all in this together. We have to empower every member of the workforce to become advocates for one another, because we do have to advocate for each other in settings that may not necessarily apply to us. Meaning, if it involves a key area of my work is in older adult oncology, greater access to cancer clinical trials for persons aged 60. I'm not 65 and above. I hope to be sometime in the eventual future. So it's an area that I chose to work in because it's important, because older adults represent the majority of those who get diagnosed with cancer and the majority of those who live with a diagnosis of cancer each year. And so it's recognizing that a group who may be at the table, or a person who may be at the table who may not share a characteristic with you, a phenotypic characteristic or a belief with you, you still take a responsibility to advocate for them. That's what it means to be part of a society, is to look out for each other. So it's never looking at somebody and saying, well, what you're going through, that's not my problem. We're not a that's not my problem. We can't be a that's not my problem culture. And so my male colleagues, some of my most ardent supporters, if there's awareness raised of unconscious bias, of unintended elements in the process that unintentionally exclude individuals or groups of people, that awareness for a values-driven person is an immediate call to action. Because fundamentally, you don't want to exclude good people because of a flaw in the process. Otis gave an example earlier, and that's one we hear over and over again, which is a candidate's name is thrown in conversation and somebody else chimes in and say, they're too busy. They have a lot going on. No. This is where, if someone's name is put forth, is give them the opportunity to go through the process that you have set up that mitigates bias, that process them, and let them be the ones to say that I don't have the bandwidth right now, or you know what, this is so important that this is I'm ready for this opportunity. Let that candidate be the person who makes a decision on whether they should put their name in the hat or not. So catching all these little tiny subtle things that happen in a split second and increasing awareness of them, and having every person at that table say, you know what, let's go ahead and let her submit an application, or ask her, request her, encourage her to submit an application. Then we can go from there. I recognize that he's busy, but let's encourage him to submit an application. This is how we get to the bottom of who are the best people for the mission at hand.
So I know we're almost at time, but I really just want to ask for one last piece of advice, a piece of practical advice that our audience can take action on today to advance gender equality. Otis, what's your one piece of advice?
I would say, listen in your workplace. If you hear someone speaking over a woman, speak up. This is especially important for men to do. We need to serve as good male allies. Say something like, I think Terry has something to add here. Let's hear her out. Or if you hear colleagues discounting a woman's ability to take on a role, remind them of her strengths. It's along the lines of what Ishwaria was saying. Steer them away from focusing on what they think she may be missing. Give her a chance. Now, as with all relationships, trust is built over time. I would suggest that you be wise. Watch how you're being treated. You know when you're being treated as an equal. Make those connections. Have honest conversations. A wise woman on my team said that a good ally reveals himself. So keep watching. It can be revealing how male leaders speak about the women on the team when the women are not in the room. It is also revealing how they speak about the women in their family. When you hear a leader speaks well of a woman, you know that he is an advocate and potentially a good male ally.
Ashwarya, let's close with your advice.
Absolutely. And so it's really about recognizing how each of us as an individual, how powerful our words truly are. And so it's advocating and elevating others who may not be in that room, or advocating and elevating, however subtly or however impactfully, the voice and the idea shared by somebody at that table. And it's recognizing that people are listening. People are listening. They pick up when you say, I love that you shared that idea. That is so key, and I appreciate that you're sharing that. And your expertise in XYZ brings something unique to this conversation. It's people hear when you, regardless of how you identify yourself, how you speak of others, how you raise and elevate others. And so it's we as individuals are incredibly powerful in how our words can impact and who our words can impact. The second part of that is find your circle, find your support system, but look broadly. One of the most remarkable products of this virtual world that we live in is the connectivity with others, with supporters, with like-minded people across institutions, across states, across countries. And so don't ever feel like you're trapped in a situation. Don't ever feel like you're stuck, because the current landscape for communication, the current landscape for engagement and community really crosses the whatever silo you may find yourself in. So find your voice, look broadly to find your voice.
So tonight's conversation has confirmed for me that gender partnership benefits all employees, and more diverse workforce, including gender diversity, is critical to invigorating problem solving, driving innovation, and enhancing productivity. However, when it comes to gender equality, believing the cause is only one piece of that equation. It's going to take all of us working together to change that narrative. Essentially, right? We all rise when women rise. Researchers, obviously, is empowering leaders to do just that. We are determined to strengthen cancer research by making sure women remain a growing force in the field. And we want to join us in becoming a 2022 Researchers Ambassador in one of the over 20 communities across the nation. You can sign up today at www.acsresearchers.org. I know our link is in the chat, so please click there. To our national corporate sponsor, Cena Medical, our registered 2022 Researcher Ambassadors, and all of our American Cancer Society supporters, wherever you're joining from us tonight, you are making a difference. Without you, your support, this work cannot be done. Collectively, we are a force to be reckoned with, and I know cancer doesn't stand a chance. Be on the lookout for more information in your inboxes soon for our next Women in Leadership conversation taking place in May. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a lovely evening.